Hello, my lovelies. Today we ask the question, what happened to the Fellowship after the One Ring was destroyed? Most stories would end with a big baddie was destroyed and they all lived happily ever after. But did they? Did it even end? I mean, this is Tolkien and not Brothers Grimm, people. But what happened after the destruction of the One Ring? You might think, well, that's it. The story's over. No, this must be the end. Well, if you've seen the movies, you know Aragorn was crowned king and got the girl, and the hobbits returned to the Shire, and all was good. Well, Peter Jackson, for reasons I totally get cinematic-wise, left out a big part of the story, an important part, a part very close to Tolkien's heart and to anyone that ever witnessed a war. The aftermath of war. Heroes coming home to their families, their old lives after gruesome events no one would even begin to understand back home. They changed. But then also their homes changed. Tolkien must have experienced this himself. He came back to the country he loved and fought for, his childhood home, to see it had become an industrialized nation of people no longer cherishing home and family and nature. All they were after was growing their wealth, no longer caring for traditions and decency, especially decency and care for everything nature always has given us. The actual end of the War of the Ring was not its destruction. The aftermath of war was still going on, everywhere in Middle-earth, but especially the Shire. The Shire, you might think, but when did war even arrive in the Shire? Wasn't this the place the hobbits fought for? A place untouched by the evils of the world, a place of festivities, celebrations, birthdays, marriages, and christenings. It was all that, yes, but war had come to the Shire. In a way, Sam's vision from Galadriel's mirror had come true. Tolkien gives us another anticlimactic battle that needed to be fought with the Scouring of the Shire. So, what had happened, and what had happened to our four hobbits? After the ring was destroyed on the 25th of March in 3019 of the Third Age, the hobbits, accompanied by Gandalf, went on their journey to Rivendell to meet with Elrond and Bilbo. On their journey, they did meet Saruman and Grima, who managed to escape Orthanc. Treebeard didn't have the heart to imprison the wizard, and so he did let both of them go. Saruman's escape happened on the 15th of August for reference. A factor must have been Saruman, although being beaten, was still a powerful Maiar, and his most influential weapon had always been the power of his voice. He had managed to cast storms and snow and turn people's hearts and minds, so it was no wonder he could convince the Ents to let him go. Their encounter wasn't a pretty one, and you feel Saruman's anger was mainly aimed at the hobbits. He knew full well these little creatures, with the help of the Ents, did manage to imprison him in Orthanc. Him, the powerful wizard. You can only imagine how that did sit with the prideful former leader of armies and the White Council. We will see Grima and Saruman again in a bit. The hobbits and Gandalf reached Rivendell beginning of September and did stay there for a while, together with Bilbo, who still resided in Elrond's home, finishing his manuscript and his part of the Red Book of Westmarch. They celebrated Frodo's and Bilbo's birthday on the 22nd of September. It was Bilbo's 129th birthday. And speaking of numbers, 78 years had now passed since Bilbo found the One Ring in 2941 of the Second Age. So the ring was in his and Frodo's possession for almost 80 years. Bilbo finally finished his story, there and back again, and added backstories to hobbits and stories and poems of the elder days. Frodo would inherit that book after Bilbo and write his memories, the War of the Ring, during his time in the Shire. So basically, the Red Book of Westmarch contained Tolkien's three great books and tales: The Hobbit, written by Bilbo, The Lord of the Ring, written by Frodo, and The Silmarillion, stories of old, translated and added by Bilbo. The book even was passed on to Sam after Frodo left, and Sam and even Merry and Pippin added stories about Gondor, Rohan, and Arnor. After Sam's passing, the book stayed in the Gamgee family through the line of his eldest daughter Elinor, who herself added stories. I find it a beautiful thought the author put in authors in his stories that kept the memory of everything that had happened, basically the history of the world alive. Frodo and Bilbo could have easily taken the book to the Undying Lands, and the stories would slowly over time have been forgotten. I think it was important to Tolkien the book stayed in Middle-earth, and the stories of old had their place in history, and the hardships and losses of good people in the fight good versus evil would not be forgotten. Often, Tolkien did erase history. Think about the downfall of Númenor. All knowledge was lost and mankind had to start from scratch again. A bit like after the destruction of the Library of Alexandria and almost all knowledge of mankind being lost. Not this time. They had learned from their mistakes, and this was a part of their history, and therefore it should not be forgotten and told and taught. The book even got copied many times, and many important events were added, so it was a living document of past and present. But back to our hobbits. The 5th of October, the hobbits left Rivendell for the Shire. Let's discuss Gandalf first, as he splits up with the hobbits on the 30th of October to visit Tom Bombadil. Sadly, we don't know a lot about that encounter. I imagine he filled in Tom in what had happened, but knowing Tom, he probably lost interest after a while. The dealings of the world, wars of men and elves were never his concern, so I guess they enjoyed a good few smokes and had a chat about anything but the War of the Rings. We do not know how long he stayed and what he did in the 2 years that did pass before we hear of him again. The 29th of September 3021, he boarded the last ship that was leaving Middle-earth to the Undying Lands. With him, Bilbo, Frodo, Elrond and Galadriel. He now openly wore his ring Narya, given to him by Círdan centuries ago, when he first arrived in Middle-earth. Gandalf's quest to aid in the war against evil, aka Sauron, had been successful. Manwë and Varda centuries ago had decided he would be one of the 5 Istari, or wizards, that would be sent as aid to the free people. The 5 wizards did arrive around the year 1000 of the Third Age, so he had been in Middle-earth for over 2000 years at the time of his departure. Actually, Gandalf was the only wizard sent by the demigods that was successful. Radagast, and the 2 blue wizards, that's a topic for another time, but we do not know of them helping in the war against Sauron, and Saruman, being the chosen leader of the 5, he probably was the biggest failure of them all. But even his de facto boss choosing the wrong side of history made Gandalf stronger in a way, and he had no more time to doubt himself. He knew he needed to take the reins himself, and he even became Gandalf the White. So he left the old Gandalf behind and went back home changed. Still, he was humble old Gandalf that loved to hang with hobbits and smoke an occasional pipe. Fun fact about Saruman: after, spoiler, being killed by Grima, his spirit left his body because, angelic spirits can't really die, can they? His spirit wanted to go west, back home to the lands he originated from. But he was denied by the gods. A strong wind blew his spirit away, and so he was denied an eternity of peace. And we don't know for sure, but I imagine his spirit stayed in Middle-earth and had enough time to see and think about all his wrongdoings for an eternity. Let's see what happened to the rest of the Fellowship, the hobbits. Let's rewind a bit, because I told you war had reached the Shire before the destruction of the ring. With Frodo and company not being present, Lotho Sackville Baggins, a close relative of Frodo and son of Lobelia, yes, the lady that was crazy about spoons, had bought a lot of land and went big on producing and selling pipeweed. Side note, that was the pipeweed we later will see in Isengard in Saruman's possession. He imprisoned the actual mayor of the Shire, Will Whitfoot, and started calling himself Chief Sheriff and moved into Bag End. With the help of evil men that had started settling in the Shire, the so-called ruffians, he brought most of the Shire under his control. Still, Saruman was steering all this from Isengard as the main criminal mastermind, because let's be honest, Lothar was a mere puppet to the wizard, and his end was quite fitting, I'd say. This is what Saruman told the hobbits about Lothar's passing. "Worm killed your chief. Poor little fellow, your nice little boss Didn't you, Worm? Stabbed him in his sleep, I believe. Buried him, I hope. Though Worm has been very hungry lately. No, Worm is not really nice. You had better leave him to me. A look of wild hatred came into Wormtongue's red eyes. You told me to. You made me do it, he hissed. So Wormtongue killed Lotho and most likely ate him after. Bon appetit, I guess. After leaving Bree, the hobbits did arrive in Bayswater on the 2nd of November. And the last battle of the War of the Rings took place, months after the ring had been destroyed. After being arrested for a bit and then released, Merry blew the horn of Buckland and rallied Shire folk that was willing to fight against Saruman's men. Additionally, Pippin did join in with the Tooks, willing to fight the evil men and free the Shire. Together they had around 300 Bucklanders, Tooks and other hobbit families joining in the fight. Amongst them, Rosie's family, the Cottons, and Farmer Maggot, shout out to that guy by the way. They stood against around 100 evil men trained and sent by Saruman himself. The battle lasted 2 days and at the end 19 hobbits were killed and many wounded. Obviously, this number is nothing compared to the lives lost in the wars before, but this is the Shire, and the hobbits are a peaceful folk. This just shows that war doesn't stop at borders and even reaches your own home. After the battle was won, the hobbits finally reached the Shire, where they found Saruman and Grima, who had settled in Bag End. I told you before what had happened to Lotho, but this would also be Saruman and Grima's last battle. Grima stabbed his abusive former master and then was shot himself by hobbit archers when he wanted to flee. What happened to the 4 hobbits? Frodo acted as deputy mayor of the Shire for a while and finished his story of the Ring Wars. Frodo celebrated another birthday in the Shire on the 22nd of September in the year 3020, but he never was the same again. He felt the pain of his wounds that would never heal in this world, as the magic used did not come from this world. He never found peace in the Shire again, and finally, after finishing his story of how he destroyed the ring, he departed for the Undying Lands, together with Bilbo, Galadriel, Elrond, and Gandalf, on the 29th of September, 3rd age, 3021. He was 53 years old when he left the world of men, and was granted to spend his final years in the Undying Lands. Merry married Estella Bolger, and became the master of Buckland, as it was a tradition in his family, the Brandybucks in 4th age 11. At the old age of 102, Merry together with Pippin returned to Gondor, and died there in 63 of the 4th age. Him and Pippin were laid to rest in Gondor, and when Aragorn, now King Elessar, died in 4th age 120, him and Pippin were buried beside one of the greatest kings of men, an honor no one of the Shire folk would ever be granted again. Pippin married Diamond of Longcleave, sorry about these names, in the year 6 of the 4th age, aged 37 years. They had one son, Faramir Took, who later married Samwise Gamgee's daughter, Goldilocks Gardner. Pippin became the 32nd Tide of the Shire in the year 4th age 13, and as mentioned before, went to Gondor to spend his last days with Merry and King Aragorn. My favorite ending is Sam's. He finally got his girl, Rosie, and his happy end in the Shire. Sam had 13 children. I will spare you all the names, just imagine lots of flowers. After Will Whitford resigned as mayor of Mickledelving, Sam was elected mayor of the Shire. Also, he planted the seeds given to him by Galadriel, and the Shire had its own melon tree as a replacement of the old party tree that was taken down by Lotho and Saruman's men. The soil in the Shire was reinvigorated, and things began to bloom, and even greater and better than ever before, thanks to the seeds of the Lady of Lorien and her gift to Sam. After Rosie's death in the year 61 4th age, Sam left the Shire for the Grey Havens. Because he had been a ring-bearer, he was allowed to cross the sea to the Undying Lands and reunite once more with Frodo. A beautiful thought. He lived a full and happy life, helped to bring the Shire back to its former glory, if not even more than that, and in the end, he was granted to spend his last days with his friend. We have 3 members of the Fellowship left. Let's talk about Gimli and Legolas next. After the war, Gimli, with what was left of Durin's folk, established a new settlement in the Glittering Caves, which were located behind Helm's Deep, and he became the first Lord of the Glittering Caves. These dwarves also were known to have rebuilt the Great Gate of Minas Tirith by replacing it with one made of mithril and steel. Gimli had already been 139 years of age when the Fellowship of the Ring went on their journey in 3018. The Third Age. His last days, just like Bilbo, Frodo and Sam, he spent in the Undying Lands with his friend Legolas. He neither was an elf, nor had he been a ring-bearer, and he must have been the only dwarf that ever was granted to live in the Undying Lands amongst the gods. Remember, the dwarves were never a part of the music of the Ainur. They were not God's children, but created by Auli the Smith, but granted life by God himself. So Gimli making it to the Undying Lands was even more special than the hobbits going there. I imagine he must have been the only dwarf, not counting the OG dwarves obviously, that ever met his creator, because Auli did live in a man. Also, you must know Tolkien later stated he did not just go for Legolas. He also wanted to see Galadriel again. I'll leave it to that, lol. Legolas, as he did promise to Gimli before the destruction of the One Ring, did visit the Glittering Caves with the dwarf. He later restored what the war and Sauron's forces had destroyed in the realms of his father. And being a Teleri, what else could he do than build a ship? A ship he later would use to cross the sea for the Undying Lands with his friend the dwarf Gimli. This is very special for many reasons. One of them being Legolas did part with his father, the king of the Woodland Realm, and did not inherit the title after Thranduil, and he left to the Undying Lands without being from there. Most of the Thranduil's people were Cinder and Grey Elves of the Teleri clan, the third house of elves. Most of them never even made it to the Undying Lands in the beginning, and they had always been the largest host of elves in Middle-earth. They were the most reluctant ones to leave Middle-earth. So him leaving is special. Also his friendship with Gimli stands out. I don't want to go too deep here, but he was a said Sindar elf, and his father was probably kin to King Thingol from Doriath, and Thranduil had seen the destruction and fall of the kingdom by the hands of dwarves that had killed his king. So again, Legolas getting along with the dwarf was very special. Let's come to the king now. Aragorn, or King Elisar, of the reunited kingdom of Gondor and Arnor. I'm planning a video on him, so again I won't go too deep into his story, but what did he do after winning the fight against Sauron? On the 1st of May he was crowned king in Minas Tirith. Gandalf himself set the crown of men upon his head and spoke the following words that would mark the beginning of a new age. Now come the days of king, and may they be blessed while the thrones of the Valar endure. The first age was the age of the Noldor fighting and hunting down Morgoth and the Silmarils, a time of wars, elves versus elves, but also fighting evil. The second age would be the age of Númenor and the rise and fall of Sauron. The third age would be marked by elves diminishing from the unknown world, the final battle against evil and the rise of men. The coming age would just be men. Dwarves and elves would disappear from the memory to a mere fairy tale. But back to Aragorn. He became the 26th king of Arnor, 35th king of Gondor, and the first High King of the reunited kingdom. Aragorn married Arwen in June 3019 Third Age, and together they would have a son, Aldarion, who would rule after him. Aragorn himself ruled the kingdom of Gondor and Arnor until 120 of the Fourth Age. His reign would be a time of great harmony and prosperity within Gondor and Arnor. So, this was the story of the aftermath of the Wars of the Ring, and the story of the Fellowship. War changed all of them, just like war did change Tolkien and so many soldiers before and after him. I love that Tolkien still gives us a happy end for many of the characters. They reclaimed their birthrights, they made the lands whole again, they found love and had children, they told their stories, and they left for new adventures. So, in Tolkien's tales, leaving your home because you changed so much, you outgrew it, is still a happy ending in a way, I feel. Thank you, my lovelies, for listening. Until the next one.